Marcus Thompson was not your average traveler. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that turned heads wherever he went. Dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, his polished leather shoes clicking softly against the tiled floor of JFK Airport, Marcus exuded the kind of presence that commanded respect. At 42 years old, he had built Technova from the ground up, a company that started in a tiny garage and grew into a global powerhouse known for revolutionizing artificial intelligence technology. On this crisp autumn morning, Marcus was heading to London for one of the most important meetings of his career. After months of negotiations, he was finalizing a deal with European investors who wanted to partner with Technova on a groundbreaking project. This wasn't just any business trip. It was the culmination of years of hard work, late nights, and relentless determination. Marcus knew how high the stakes were, and he wasn't about to let anything stand in his way. As he approached Gate 23, Marcus adjusted the strap of his leather briefcase over his shoulder and pulled out his phone to double-check his itinerary. Everything was in order. First-class ticket, reserved seat 1A, and a car waiting for him at Heathrow Airport. He handed his boarding pass to the attendant behind the counter, expecting the usual polite nod and smooth transition onto the plane. But instead of the quick scan and smile he anticipated, the attendant paused, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied the ticket. "Sir," she said hesitantly, "I'm sorry, but there seems to be an issue with your reservation." Marcus blinked, taken aback. "An issue? What do you mean?" he asked calmly, though his brow furrowed in confusion. He glanced down at the boarding pass in her hand, where his name, Marcus Thompson, was printed clearly next to first class. The ICU attendant didn't answer right away. Instead, she tapped something into her computer, her lips pressed together in what looked like forced patience. Behind Marcus, other passengers shuffled forward, eager to board. One man, dressed in a light gray sweater and jeans, breezed past without so much as a second glance. His boarding pass was scanned effortlessly, and he disappeared down the jet bridge toward the plane. Marcus felt a flicker of unease. Something about this situation didn't sit right. "Can you tell me what the problem is?" he asked again, his voice steady but firmer now. The attendant finally spoke, though her tone lacked warmth. "It appears your seat assignment has been flagged. I'll need to verify this with my supervisor." Before Marcus could respond, she turned away and motioned for someone else to come over. A few moments later, a middle-aged man wearing a dark blazer with a name tag reading Gregory appeared. His expression was neutral, almost detached, as if he'd dealt with hundreds of similar situations before. Without making eye contact, Gregory took the boarding pass from the attendant and began typing furiously on his tablet. "Mr. Thompson," Gregory said after a long pause, "we're seeing some inconsistencies here. Your ticket doesn't seem to match our records for first class." Marcus stared at him, incredulous. "That's impossible," he replied firmly. "I purchased this ticket weeks ago through your website. You can see my confirmation number right there." He pointed to the string of digits printed below his name. Gregory glanced at the ticket briefly before shaking his head. "Unfortunately, sir, we can't process this until we resolve the discrepancy. Perhaps you'd like to take a seat in economy while we sort this out?" Economy? Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. Economy seats were cramped, uncomfortable, and certainly not suitable for someone traveling on such a critical mission. More than that, he knew exactly what was happening here. It wasn't about a discrepancy or a technical error. It was something deeper, something uglier, and Marcus had seen it all too often in his life. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay composed. Losing his temper wouldn't help, no matter how infuriating the situation was. "Listen," he said slowly, enunciating each word. "There's no mistake. My ticket is valid and I'm flying first class today. If you have questions about my reservation, I suggest you check again or escalate this to someone higher up." Gregory hesitated, clearly unprepared for Marcus's assertiveness. For a moment it seemed like he might relent. But then he straightened his posture and adopted a more authoritative tone. "Sir, unless we can confirm your booking, we cannot allow you to board in first class. We apologize for the inconvenience." The word inconvenience hung in the air like a bad smell. Marcus clenched his jaw but decided not to argue further, at least not yet. Stepping aside, he pulled out his phone and dialed his assistant, Samantha. She answered on the second ring, her cheerful greeting quickly turning serious when she heard the tension in his voice. "Samantha, I need you to pull up my flight confirmation immediately," Marcus instructed. "There's been an issue at the gate." While Samantha worked on verifying the details, Marcus stood off to the side, acutely aware of the stares and whispers around him. Some passengers looked sympathetic, while others seemed annoyed by the delay. A few even muttered under their breath about people causing trouble. Marcus ignored them, focusing instead on keeping his emotions in check. He'd faced obstacles like this before, both in his personal life and in the cutthroat world of entrepreneurship. Each time he'd found a way to push through, and this wouldn't be any different. Within minutes, Samantha called back. "Marcus, everything checks out," she said confidently. "Your ticket is legitimate and your seat assignment is confirmed. I've emailed copies of all the documentation to your phone, just in case they give you more trouble." Marcus thanked her and hung up, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Armed with proof, he returned to the counter, ready to confront the airline staff once more. But as he approached, he noticed something strange. The attendants were whispering among themselves, casting furtive glances in his direction. Whatever was going on, it was clear they weren't planning to make this easy for him. And that's when Marcus realized this wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was about power, privilege, and the deeply ingrained biases that still existed in society. He had two choices. He could walk away quietly, letting them win, or he could fight back and remind them exactly who they were dealing with. And Marcus Thompson wasn't the type to back down. Marcus stood at the counter, his phone clutched firmly in one hand and his boarding pass in the other. The digital copies of his ticket confirmation glowed brightly on the screen, a clear testament to the validity of his reservation. He took a deep breath, steadying himself before addressing Gregory and the attendant again. "Here's my confirmation," he said, placing the phone on the counter for them to see. "You can verify it yourselves." Gregory glanced at the screen, but didn't pick up the phone. Instead, he crossed his arms and leaned back slightly as if trying to create some distance between himself and Marcus. "Sir, we appreciate your patience, but sometimes these systems malfunction. It happens more often than you'd think." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Malfunction? Are you suggesting that I fabricated this confirmation email myself?" His tone was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it now. The attendant chimed in nervously, her voice trembling just enough to betray her discomfort. "We're not saying that, sir. We're just following protocol." "Protocol?" Marcus repeated, his voice rising slightly despite his efforts to stay composed. "So your protocol involves treating paying customers like criminals because they happen to have a first-class ticket?" By now, a small crowd had gathered nearby, drawn by the tension crackling in the air. Some passengers watched curiously, while others whispered among themselves. A few even pulled out their phones, recording snippets of the exchange. One elderly woman shook her head disapprovingly, muttering loud enough for those around her to hear. "This is ridiculous. He's clearly done nothing wrong." Gregory, sensing the growing attention, tried to regain control of the situation. "Sir, if you'll step aside, we can escalate this matter to our customer service team." "I've already stepped aside," Marcus interrupted, his frustration bubbling closer to the surface. "I gave you time to sort things out, and yet here we are. My ticket is valid, my documents are in order, and still you refuse to let me board. Why is that?" Before Gregory could respond, another passenger, a tall man in a business suit who had been waiting patiently in line, spoke up. "Excuse me," he said, addressing Gregory directly. "I couldn't help but overhear. If his ticket checks out, why are you delaying him? This is unfair and frankly it's unprofessional." Gregory stiffened, visibly caught off guard by the unexpected intervention. "Sir, please understand, we're doing everything we can to resolve this," he stammered. The man wasn't satisfied. Doing everything? Or making excuses? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like discrimination, plain and simple. Murmur rippled through the crowd. some nodding in agreement while others shifted uncomfortably. Marcus appreciated the support but knew better than to rely on bystanders to fight his battles. Still, hearing someone else call out the injustice bolstered his resolve. Turning back to Gregory, Marcus decided to make one final attempt at reason. "Look," he said evenly, "I don't want to cause a scene. All I want is to board the flight I paid for. You can either honor my ticket now, or I'll take further action. The choice is yours." Gregory hesitated, clearly unsure of how to proceed. On one hand, allowing Marcus to board would mean admitting fault, and potentially facing consequences from his superiors. On the other hand, continuing to deny him access risked escalating the situation even further. The weight of the decision seemed to press down on him, evident in the beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Gregory reached for the phone on the counter and dialed a number. "Let me speak with someone higher up," he muttered under his breath, avoiding eye contact with Marcus. As he waited for the call to connect, Marcus stepped back, crossing his arms and surveying the scene around him. The atmosphere at the gate had shifted noticeably. Passengers who had initially appeared indifferent were now openly discussing the incident. One young woman approached Marcus cautiously, her expression sympathetic. "Is there anything I can do to help?" she asked quietly. "This is messed up." Marcus offered her a small, grateful smile. "Thank you for asking, but I've got it under control, for now." He didn't elaborate, knowing full well that this moment wasn't just about him anymore. It was about setting an example, proving that no one should tolerate being treated unfairly simply because of the color of their skin. As Gregory continued his hushed conversation on the phone, Marcus's mind raced. He thought about all the times he'd faced similar situations throughout his life, being underestimated, overlooked, or outright dismissed because of preconceived notions. From struggling to secure funding for Technova in its early days to navigating corporate boardrooms dominated by people who didn't look like him, Marcus had learned to navigate a world that often seemed stacked against him. But this was different. This was public, blatant, and impossible to ignore. When Gregory finally hung up the phone, his demeanor had changed. Gone was the authoritative stance. Instead, he looked almost apologetic, though his words betrayed little remorse. "Sir, I've spoken with our senior management team and they've instructed us to recheck your reservation one more time. Please bear with us for a few moments longer." Marcus nodded curtly, refusing to let his guard down. He knew better than to trust empty promises at this point. While Gregory fumbled with his tablet again, Marcus pulled out his own phone and opened his contacts list. Scrolling through the names, he found the one he needed. James Carter. James was more than just a friend. He was a powerful ally, someone whose influence stretched far beyond the tech industry. As the majority shareholder of Global Aviation Holdings, the parent company overseeing this very airline, James had the power to make waves. Marcus had never intended to involve him in something like this, but desperate times called for desperate measures. He tapped the call button and lifted the phone to his ear. After 2 rings, James answered, his voice warm and familiar. "Marcus, what's going on? Everything okay?" "Hey, James," Marcus began, keeping his tone measured. "Not exactly. I'm at JFK right now trying to board a flight to London, and, well, let's just say I'm running into some issues." James immediately picked up on the seriousness in Marcus's voice. "Issues? Like what?" Marcus sighed, glancing briefly at Gregory, who was still pretending to review his reservation. "They're claiming there's a problem with my first-class ticket, but I know it's valid. I've got all the documentation to prove it, yet they won't let me board." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When James spoke again, his tone was sharp, tinged with anger. "Are you serious? That's unacceptable. Let me guess, they're giving you the runaround because of how you look, aren't they?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded, forgetting for a moment that James couldn't see him. Yeah, that's pretty much it. James didn't waste any time. "All right, here's what we're going to do. Stay put, and don't let them bully you into accepting anything less than what you deserve. I'll handle this personally. Relief. washed over Marcus, though he kept his expression neutral. "Thanks, James, I really appreciate it." "No problem," James replied firmly. "Consider it handled." With that, Marcus ended the call, feeling a renewed sense of confidence. Whatever happened next, he knew he wouldn't be fighting alone. And judging by the way Gregory suddenly froze mid-sentence, staring wide-eyed at his tablet as if he'd received new instructions, the tide was about to turn. For the first time, since arriving at the gate, Marcus allowed himself a faint smile. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but he had faith that justice would prevail. After all, he'd spent his entire life proving doubters wrong. Today would be no exception. As Marcus hung up the phone, he could feel the energy in the room shift. Gregory's face had gone pale, and his hands were trembling slightly as he stared at the screen of his tablet. Whatever message he'd just received was clearly unsettling, and it didn't take long for Marcus to realize that James Carter had wasted no time making his presence known. The airline staff, who moments ago had been dismissive and evasive, now seemed to be scrambling to figure out their next move. Marcus stood quietly, watching them with a calm but piercing gaze. He wasn't going to say anything. Not yet. Instead, he let the silence speak for itself, allowing the weight of the situation to sink in. Around him, passengers continued to murmur among themselves, some openly criticizing the airline's handling of the situation, while others speculated about what might happen next. A few even approached Marcus to offer words of encouragement, though he politely thanked them and asked them to give him space. This wasn't just a personal battle anymore. It was becoming something much bigger. Gregory finally looked up from his tablet, his voice shaky as he addressed Marcus. "Sir, we're reviewing your reservation again. I assure you we're doing everything we can to resolve this quickly." Marcus raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "Quickly? Interesting choice of words. It's funny how things speed up when someone important gets involved, isn't it?" Gregory didn't respond, but the flush creeping up his neck suggested he understood exactly what Marcus meant. For the first time since the ordeal began, the airline staff seemed genuinely nervous. They exchanged frantic glances, whispering urgently to each other as they tried to figure out how to salvage the situation. Behind the counter, another supervisor appeared, a woman in her late 40s wearing a crisp blazer and a name tag that read, Linda. She took one look at Gregory's panicked expression and immediately stepped forward, clearly trying to take charge. "Mr. Thompson," Linda said, her tone overly sweet. "I understand there's been some confusion here, and I want to personally apologize on behalf of the airline. We're sorting this out right now, and I promise we'll have you on your way shortly." Marcus crossed his arms, his posture relaxed but commanding. "Sorting it out? That's interesting because my ticket has been valid all along. The only thing that's changed is that I made a phone call. Care to explain why that matters so much?" Linda hesitated, clearly caught off guard by Marcus's directness. She glanced briefly at Gregory before turning back to Marcus, forcing a tight smile. "Well, sir, sometimes these systems require additional verification, especially for premium seating. But rest assured we're addressing the issue as swiftly as possible." Marcus shook his head slowly, his patience wearing thin. "You know, I've heard every excuse in the book over the years. System error, protocol, additional verification. They're all just code words for something else, aren't they? Something that has nothing to do with technology or procedures and everything to do with assumptions." The crowd around them grew quieter, hanging on every word. Linda opened her mouth to respond but stopped herself, realizing she was walking into dangerous territory. Instead, she gestured toward the gate area. "If you'd like to wait in our lounge while we finalize this, we'd be happy to escort you there." "No, thank you," Marcus replied firmly. "I'm not leaving until this is resolved. And trust me, it will be resolved, one way or another." His words carried a quiet authority that left no room for argument. Linda nodded stiffly and turned back to her colleagues, speaking in hushed tones as they huddled together. Meanwhile, Marcus took a step back, leaning casually against a nearby pillar as he observed the chaos unfolding before him. He knew the airline was panicking, And he also knew that James Carter's intervention had likely sent shockwaves through their corporate offices. What he didn't know yet was how far-reaching the consequences would be, but he was about to find out. Less than 5 minutes later, the gate area erupted into commotion. Ground crew members rushed onto the scene, frantically waving their arms, and shouting instructions to halt boarding entirely. Passengers who had already boarded were instructed to disembark, while those still waiting in line were told to return to the terminal. Announcements blared over the intercom system, citing technical difficulties as the reason for the delay. Confusion spread like wildfire as travelers scrambled to figure out what was happening. Marcus watched the spectacle unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and frustration. He hadn't wanted to disrupt the entire flight, but he also knew that drastic measures were sometimes necessary to expose systemic problems. As the reality of the situation set in, he noticed several passengers approaching him, their expressions a mix of curiosity and admiration. One man, a middle-aged businessman with salt and pepper hair, extended his hand. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for what you're going through," he said earnestly. "This is wrong, and it shouldn't be happening in 2023. You're handling it with incredible grace." Marcus shook his hand, offering a small smile. "Thank you. I appreciate that. But honestly, this isn't just about me. It's about holding people accountable when they try to treat others unfairly." The man nodded solemnly. "Well, whatever happens next, I hope they learn from this. People need to see that actions have consequences." Before Marcus could respond, Linda reappeared, looking flustered and out of breath. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice strained, "we've confirmed your reservation and your seat in first class is ready for you. Please accept our sincerest apologies for the inconvenience." Marcus arched an eyebrow, unimpressed by the sudden change of heart. "Apologies are nice," he said coolly, "but they don't fix the underlying problem. Why did this happen in the first place? Was it really a system error, or was it something else?" Linda hesitated, clearly uncomfortable under his scrutiny. "Sir, I assure you, we're conducting a full review of this incident. Our goal is to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again." "And yet," Marcus countered, his voice cutting through the tension, "you're still avoiding the real issue. This wasn't about a system error or a miscommunication. It was about bias, plain and simple. Until you acknowledge that, nothing will change." Linda opened her mouth to respond but thought better of it. Instead, she gestured toward the jet bridge, inviting Marcus to proceed to the plane. He hesitated for a moment, weighing his options. Part of him wanted to refuse, to make a statement by refusing to board altogether. But another part of him, the pragmatic side, knew that walking away wouldn't solve anything. If he truly wanted to drive change, he needed to stay and fight. With a deep breath, Marcus grabbed his briefcase and strode toward the gate, his head held high. As he passed through the threshold, he could feel the eyes of the passengers on him, their gazes a mixture of respect and pity. He ignored them, focusing instead on the task ahead. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. In fact, it was only the beginning. By the time Marcus settled into his seat in first class, the cabin was buzzing with whispers. Flight attendants moved briskly up and down the aisles, their faces taut with anxiety as they worked to restore order. Outside, ground crew members scurried around the plane, their radios crackling with urgent updates. It was clear that the ripple effects of Marcus's decision to stand his ground were being felt far beyond the confines of Gate 23. As the plane taxied down the runway, Marcus leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes for a moment. He felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, relief, determination, all swirling together in a storm of thoughts. He knew that this incident would follow him long after the flight landed in London. Journalists would want interviews, social media would explode with commentary, and the airline would scramble to control the narrative. But none of that mattered to Marcus right now. What mattered was that he had stood up for himself, and in doing so, he had shone a light on a problem that many chose to ignore. Discrimination wasn't always overt. Sometimes it hid behind excuses and euphemisms, masquerading as innocent mistakes. But Marcus had seen through the facade, and he had refused to let it slide. As the plane lifted off the ground, climbing higher and higher into the sky, Marcus opened his eyes and stared out. The window. Below him, New York City stretched out like a glittering mosaic, its streets teeming with life. Somewhere in that vast expanse, countless stories of injustice played out every day, often unseen and unheard. But today, one story had been brought into the spotlight, and Marcus intended to make sure it sparked a conversation that couldn't be ignored. By the time Marcus's flight touched down in London, the incident at JFK Airport had already begun to ripple across the globe. News traveled fast in the age of social media, and within hours, snippets of the confrontation were circulating online. Passengers who had witnessed the scene firsthand shared videos and photos, their captions brimming with outrage. "This is unacceptable. How can this still happen in 2023? The hashtags ARF Justice for Marcus and YARF Airline Accountability quickly gained traction, drawing thousands of comments from people eager to voice their support or their anger. Back at the airline's headquarters, chaos reigned supreme. Executives huddled in emergency meetings, frantically trying to assess the damage and formulate a response. Emails flew back and forth between departments, each one more panicked than the last. The CEO of the airline, a polished but perpetually stressed man named Richard Langley, found himself fielding calls from investors, public relations teams, and even government officials demanding answers. At the center of it all was James Carter's name, a reminder that this wasn't just a PR nightmare. It was a potential existential crisis for the company. Richard leaned back in his leather chair, rubbing his temples as he stared at the latest report on his desk. It detailed the fallout: plummeting stock prices, canceled reservations, and a barrage of negative press. But worse than any of that was the mounting public scrutiny. Reporters were digging into the airline's history, uncovering past complaints about racial bias and discriminatory practices. What had started as an isolated incident was now threatening to expose years of systemic neglect. "Sir," his assistant said hesitantly, poking her head into the room, "you have another call. This time it's Mr. Carter." Richard froze, his heart sinking. He knew exactly who Mr. Carter was and what kind of power he wielded. With a deep sigh, he picked up the phone, plastering a strained smile onto his face despite knowing full well that James couldn't see him. "Mr. Carter, thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I understand there's been some concern regarding—" "Cut the pleasantries, Richard," James interrupted, his tone sharp but controlled. "I'm sure you're aware of why I'm calling. Care to explain how one of my closest friends was treated at your airport today?" Richard swallowed hard, gripping the edge of his desk. "Of course, sir. First, let me assure you that we're conducting a thorough investigation into the matter. We deeply regret any inconvenience caused to Mr. Thompson and are committed to ensuring—" "Regret isn't enough," James shot back, his voice cutting like steel. "What happened to Marcus wasn't just an inconvenience. It was discrimination, plain and simple. And if you think issuing a generic apology is going to fix this, you're sorely mistaken." The line went silent for a moment, the weight of James's words hanging heavily in the air. Richard knew better than to argue. Instead, he chose his next words carefully. "Understood, sir. We'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Please tell me what you'd like us to do." James paused, clearly considering his options. When he spoke again, his tone softened slightly, but only slightly. "First, you're going to issue a public apology. Not some vague statement buried in fine print, but a real one. You'll acknowledge what happened, take full responsibility, and outline concrete steps to prevent it from happening again. Second, you'll compensate Marcus appropriately. That means not just a refund or a few free flights, but something substantial. Third, and most importantly, you're going to implement mandatory diversity training for every single employee from gate agents to executives. And I don't mean checking a box, I mean meaningful change." Richard scribbled notes furiously, nodding even though James couldn't see him. "Absolutely, sir. Consider it done." "And Richard," James added, his voice firm once more, "don't make me regret trusting you to handle this. If I hear so much as a whisper of resistance, I won't hesitate to escalate this further. Do we understand each other?" "Yes, sir," Richard replied without hesitation. "Crystal clear." When the call ended, Richard slumped back in his chair, feeling the enormity of the situation bearing down on him. He knew James wasn't bluffing. If the airline didn't act swiftly and decisively, they risked losing not just customers but also major investors like James himself. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Meanwhile, Marcus had landed in London and was making his way through customs when he received a text from Samantha. "Breaking news alert," it read, followed by a link to a live stream of a press conference being held by the airline. Curious, Marcus clicked on the link and watched as Richard Langley stepped up to a podium, flanked by several members of his executive team. The room was packed with reporters, their cameras flashing like strobe lights as they jockeyed for position. "Good evening," Richard began, his voice steady but tinged with nervousness. "Earlier today, an unacceptable situation occurred at one of our gates at JFK Airport involving a valued customer, Mr. Marcus Thompson. On behalf of everyone at Airline Name, I want to extend our sincerest apologies to Mr. Thompson for the treatment he received. There is no excuse for what happened, and we are taking immediate action to address the root causes of this incident." He went on to outline the measures James had demanded: the public apology, compensation for Marcus, and comprehensive diversity training programs. He also announced the creation of a task force dedicated to reviewing and revising company policies to ensure fairness and equity for all passengers. By the time he finished speaking, the room erupted into a flurry of questions, with reporters firing off inquiries about everything from the specifics of the training program to whether anyone involved in the incident would face disciplinary action. As Marcus listened, he felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, he appreciated the swift response. It showed that the airline recognized the gravity of the situation. On the other hand, he couldn't help but feel skeptical. Apologies were easy. Real change was hard. And while the promises sounded good on paper, Marcus knew that implementing them effectively would require more than just lip service. Still, he decided to give the airline the benefit of the doubt. For now. After all, he hadn't fought this battle alone. Countless others had stood with him, amplifying his voice and pushing for accountability. As he scrolled through Twitter later that evening, he saw countless messages of support from strangers around the world. Some shared their own experiences of discrimination while traveling, while others praised Marcus for standing up and refusing to be silenced. The overwhelming solidarity moved him, reinforcing his belief that this moment could spark something bigger. The following morning, Marcus arrived at the meeting with European investors, determined to focus on the task at hand. But as he walked into the conference room, he noticed something unusual. Several of the attendees greeted him with knowing smiles, nodding respectfully as if they already knew who he was. It turned out that news of the incident had reached them, too. And rather than damaging his reputation, it had actually bolstered it. They admired his poise under pressure and his willingness to challenge injustice, qualities that resonated deeply in the business world. By the end of the day, Marcus had successfully secured the deal, cementing Technova's place as a global leader in innovation. But as he celebrated the victory with his team over dinner, he couldn't shake the thought that this was only the beginning. The fight against discrimination didn't end with one incident or one apology. It required constant vigilance and collective effort. That night, as Marcus lay in bed replaying the events of the past 24 hours, he made a decision. He would use his platform to push for broader change, not just within the airline industry, but across society as a whole. Whether it was partnering with advocacy groups, mentoring young entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities, or simply continuing to speak out whenever he encountered injustice, Marcus knew he had a responsibility to keep fighting. And so, what began as a single act of defiance at an airport gate transformed into a catalyst for transformation. For Marcus, it was proof that even in the face of adversity, standing up for what's right could inspire others to do the same. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Marcus was ready, because sometimes all it took was one person to shine a light, and show the world that change was possible. The days following Marcus's confrontation at JFK Airport turned into a whirlwind of media attention, public discourse, and calls for accountability. What had started as a personal struggle quickly evolved into a national conversation about racial bias, systemic discrimination, and the need for meaningful change. News outlets couldn't get enough of the story. Every angle was explored, every detail dissected. Morning talk shows invited experts to weigh in on corporate responsibility, while late-night hosts used the incident as fodder for biting satire. The hashtag #Justice for Marcus trended globally, sparking debates that ranged from heartfelt to heated. For Marcus, the sudden spotlight was both empowering and overwhelming. On one hand, he felt grateful for the outpouring of support from people around the world who shared their own stories of discrimination. Many recounted similar experiences, being questioned at check-in counters, ignored by service staff, or outright denied access to spaces they had every right to occupy. These accounts reinforced Marcus's belief that his experience wasn't isolated. It was part of a larger pattern of prejudice that needed to be addressed. On the other hand, the constant attention made it difficult for him to focus on his work. Reporters camped outside his London hotel, hoping to catch a glimpse of him leaving for meetings. Social media notifications flooded his phone, each one bringing another message of solidarity or criticism. Some accused him of exaggerating the situation, suggesting that he should have let it go rather than causing such a disruption. Others praised him for standing firm, calling him a role model for marginalized communities everywhere. The mixed reactions weighed heavily on Marcus, reminding him how polarizing issues of race and privilege could be. Despite the noise, Marcus remained resolute. He knew this moment presented an opportunity, a chance to amplify voices that often went unheard and push for tangible reforms. Instead of retreating into privacy, he leaned into the platform he'd been given. Within days, he partnered with several civil rights organizations to launch a campaign aimed at combating discrimination in travel and beyond. Dubbed Fair Passage, the initiative sought to hold airlines, hotels, and other service industries accountable for biased practices, while advocating for policies that promoted inclusivity and respect. One of the first steps Marcus took was organizing a virtual town hall meeting. Using his connections in tech and business, he brought together leaders from various sectors, aviation executives, diversity consultants, legal experts, and grassroots activists to discuss solutions. Thousands tuned in to watch the live stream, eager to hear what actionable steps could be taken to address the issue. During the event, Marcus opened up about his own experience, sharing not just the details of the incident, but also the emotions it stirred within him. "I've faced discrimination before," he admitted, his voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. "It's something many of us deal with regularly, whether it's subtle microaggressions or blatant acts of exclusion. But this time I decided I wouldn't stay silent, because silence only perpetuates the problem." His words resonated deeply with viewers, many of whom took to social media afterward to express their admiration for his courage. One woman tweeted, "Thank you, Marcus Thompson, for showing us that speaking up matters. Your strength gives me hope." Another wrote, "As a black traveler, I've been treated unfairly so many times. Seeing someone stand up like this makes me feel seen." The airline, meanwhile, scrambled to repair its damaged reputation. True to Richard Langley's promises during the press conference, the company rolled out its diversity training program within weeks. Employees underwent workshops designed to raise awareness about unconscious bias and teach them how to interact with customers more equitably. Posters emphasizing inclusivity were plastered across airport lounges, and promotional materials highlighted the airline's commitment to a culture of respect and equality. But not everyone was convinced. Critics argued that these efforts amounted to performative activism, superficial gestures meant to appease the public without addressing deeper structural issues. Activists pointed out that true change required more than mandatory seminars. It demanded a fundamental shift in mindset, starting with leadership. "You can't just slap a Band-Aid on racism," said Dr. Elena Morales, a sociologist specializing in institutional bias, during an interview on a popular news channel. These companies need to examine their hiring practices, their customer service protocols, and their overall corporate culture. Otherwise, we'll keep seeing the same problems over and over again. Marcus agreed wholeheartedly. While he appreciated the airline's attempts to make amends, he knew that real progress would take time and sustained effort. To ensure accountability, he worked with advocacy groups to establish a watchdog committee tasked with monitoring the airline's actions moving forward. Comprised of independent experts and community representatives, the committee would evaluate the effectiveness of the training programs, review passenger complaints, and publish annual reports detailing areas for improvement. In addition to holding corporations accountable, Marcus also focused on inspiring individuals to take action in their own lives. Through interviews, op-eds, and appearances on influential podcasts, he encouraged listeners to reflect on their biases and challenge discriminatory behavior whenever they encountered it. "Change starts with us," he emphasized during one particularly poignant speech. "It's not enough to say you're against racism or sexism or any form of prejudice. You have to actively work to dismantle the systems that perpetuate them. That means speaking up when you see injustice, supporting marginalized voices, and educating yourself about the challenges others face." His message struck a chord, especially among young professionals eager to create a better future. College students reached out to thank him for giving them the courage to confront bias in their classrooms and workplaces. Entrepreneurs credited him with motivating them to build inclusive companies where everyone felt valued. Even strangers stopped him on the street to shake his hand and share how his story had impacted them personally. As the weeks passed, Marcus began to notice subtle shifts in societal attitudes. More people were openly discussing topics like privilege and allyship, topics that had once been considered taboo. Corporations, fearful of facing similar backlash, started reevaluating their own practices. Hotels implemented stricter anti-discrimination policies, ride-sharing apps introduced bias reporting features, and retail chains pledged to diversify their leadership teams. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was a start. Still, Marcus understood that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. There would always be those resistant to change, clinging to outdated beliefs or dismissing calls for reform as unnecessary. For every person inspired by his actions, there would be another questioning his motives or minimizing the significance of the incident. But Marcus refused to let cynicism deter him. He believed in the power of persistence, in the idea that small victories could add up to monumental change. By the end of the month, Marcus returned to New York, ready to continue his mission. As he stepped off the plane, he was greeted not by hostility or indifference, but by applause. Fellow passengers recognized him and clapped enthusiastically, some even cheering. It was a surreal moment, one that filled him with both pride and humility. He smiled graciously, nodding in acknowledgement, but inside he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This fight wasn't just about him anymore. It was about creating a world where no one had to endure the indignity of being judged based on the color of their skin or the assumptions of others. It was about proving that standing up for justice wasn't just an act of defiance, it was an act of love, for oneself and for humanity. And Marcus Thompson was determined to see it through, no matter how hard the journey might be. Months had passed since the incident at JFK Airport, but its impact continued to reverberate far beyond what Marcus could have imagined. The ripple effects of that single act of defiance had transformed not only his life, but also the lives of countless others who saw themselves in his story. What began as a personal battle against discrimination had become a movement, a catalyst for change that inspired individuals and institutions alike to confront uncomfortable truths and strive for a more equitable future. For Marcus, returning to New York felt like coming full circle. The city greeted him with open arms, not just as a successful entrepreneur, but as a symbol of resilience and advocacy. Invitations poured in from all corners. Universities wanted him to deliver commencement speeches, nonprofits sought his guidance on diversity initiatives, and tech conferences begged him to share insights about leadership and accountability. Yet, despite the growing demands on his time, Marcus remained grounded. always reminding himself why he had chosen to speak out in the first place. One of the most significant developments came when Fair Passage, the initiative he co-founded, gained traction on a global scale. Partnering with major organizations across industries, the campaign introduced a certification program for businesses committed to combating bias and promoting inclusivity. Companies that met rigorous standards, ranging from equitable hiring practices to transparent customer service protocols, earned the Fair Passage seal, a badge of honor signaling their dedication to fairness. Within months, dozens of airlines, hotels, and retail chains proudly displayed the seal, eager to align themselves with the values it represented. But Marcus knew that true progress required more than corporate buy-in. It needed grassroots support. To foster this, he launched a mentorship program aimed at empowering young professionals from underrepresented communities. Through workshops, networking events, and one-on-one coaching sessions, participants learned how to navigate systemic barriers while building careers in fields traditionally dominated by privilege. Many credited the program with giving them the tools and confidence to pursue opportunities they once thought were out of reach. The airline responsible for the original incident underwent its own transformation, albeit under intense scrutiny. After implementing its diversity training programs, the company faced criticism for inconsistencies in execution. Some employees reported feeling rushed through superficial modules, while others praised the sessions for sparking meaningful conversations. Recognizing the need for improvement, executives doubled down on their efforts, investing in long-term partnerships with civil rights organizations and hiring external auditors to ensure accountability. Slowly but surely, the culture began to shift, not perfectly but noticeably. Public perception of the airline improved as well. Passengers shared stories of positive interactions with staff, highlighting instances where empathy and respect replaced suspicion and bias. One viral video showed a gate agent going above and beyond to assist a wheelchair-bound traveler, earning widespread praise online. While these moments didn't erase the past, they demonstrated that change, however incremental, was possible. Meanwhile, Marcus's influence extended into areas he hadn't anticipated. His story inspired filmmakers to adapt it into a documentary titled Seat 1A, which premiered at a prestigious film festival to standing ovations. The project combined interviews with Marcus, witnesses from the airport, and experts in racial justice, weaving together a narrative that resonated deeply with audiences worldwide. Critics hailed it as a powerful exploration of modern-day discrimination and the power of individual courage to spark collective action. The success of the documentary brought renewed attention to Marcus's advocacy work, prompting him to expand his efforts even further. He collaborated with policymakers to draft legislation addressing bias in transportation and hospitality sectors, pushing for stricter regulations and greater oversight. Lawmakers listened intently, recognizing the urgency of the issue in an increasingly interconnected world. Though passing such bills would take time, the mere fact that they were being discussed signaled progress. On a personal level, Marcus found solace in knowing that his actions had made a difference, not just for himself but for generations to come. Friends and colleagues often remarked on how much he seemed to glow during this period, his usual calm demeanor now tinged with quiet pride. Yet, he never let the accolades go to his head. Instead, he used every opportunity to amplify the voices of those still fighting for recognition and justice. One evening, as Marcus sat in his Manhattan penthouse overlooking the glittering skyline, he reflected on everything that had transpired. The journey had been challenging, filled with moments of doubt and frustration, but it had also been profoundly rewarding, reaffirming his belief in the power of perseverance and community. He thought about the passengers who had stood up for him at the gate, the strangers who had reached out with messages of support, and the activists who had joined forces to drive change. Together, they had proven that no one had to face injustice alone. As he scrolled through social media, Marcus stumbled upon a post from a young woman named Aisha, whose story mirrored his own. She described being racially profiled at a train station and initially feeling too intimidated to speak up. But after hearing Marcus's account, she decided to file a formal complaint and demand answers. Her courage led to an internal investigation, resulting in policy changes within the transit authority. In her caption, Aisha wrote, "Thank you, Marcus Thompson, for showing me that my voice matters. Because of you, I know I can make a difference." Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes as he read her words. This was why he had fought so hard, not for fame or recognition, but for moments like this. Moments when someone realized their worth and found the strength to stand up for it. The following week, Marcus delivered a keynote address at a global summit on diversity and inclusion. Standing before thousands of attendees, he spoke candidly about the challenges ahead and the importance of staying vigilant. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he said, his voice steady yet impassioned. "It takes patience, persistence, and a willingness to confront discomfort. But if we commit ourselves to this work, if we refuse to settle for anything less than equality, we can create a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect." His closing remarks drew thunderous applause, but Marcus didn't linger to bask in the adoration. Instead, he slipped out quietly, eager to return to the work that mattered most. As he walked through the bustling streets of the city, he noticed something remarkable. Posters featuring his face alongside the slogan, "Your Voice Matters," adorned bus stops and billboards. The sight filled him with both pride and responsibility. He knew the fight wasn't over, but he also knew that he wasn't alone. In the months and years that followed, Marcus continued to lead by example, using his platform to tackle new challenges and inspire others to do the same. Whether it was advocating for affordable housing, supporting education reform, or championing environmental justice, he approached each cause with the same unwavering determination that had defined his response to the airline incident. And though the road remained long and uncertain, Marcus carried with him the knowledge that every step forward counted. Every conversation, every policy change, every person empowered, all of it contributed to a brighter, fairer future. Because sometimes all it took was one person to stand up and say, "Enough." And in doing so, they reminded the world that justice wasn't just a dream, it was a possibility waiting to be realized.